February 28th, 1983, a cold night in St. Louis. Two men, Mr. Thompson and Mr. Harris, head into the basement of an abandoned apartment building looking for copper pipe parts, but what they find instead will haunt the city for decades. A young girl, no older than 12, brutally murdered, decapitated. Her head was never found. Her name is still unknown, and for investigators who saw her, the memory never left. Hey everybody, welcome back to Dark Trails. I am Moni, and I'm soloing today's podcast. Don't you worry, Jinkies and I will be back doing a cool episode in the coming weeks. But today, I'm taking you onto one of the most heartbreaking unsolved cases in American history. The 1983 St. Louis Jane Doe, often called Hope or Precious Hope. Now, to prepare for this podcast, I watched the documentary on this, which was absolutely heart-wrenching, heartbreaking. It was called Our Precious Hope, the St. Louis Jane Doe. Yeah. Sorry. This case, and I can tell you, this case definitely stays with me, stays with you, for people that are listening to this podcast, not because of the brutality, but because of the silence surrounding it. No missing persons report, no family stepping forward, no name. But now she's known as Precious Hope. Today I'm telling you her story with the help of forensic experts that were in the documentary, community voices, and also advocates who refuse to let her be forgotten. Now for this first segment, the discovery happened in the building at 5635 Clemens in St. Louis. And it was abandoned with boarded windows, peeling paint, a typical apartment building that has been untouched for years. Two men ditching a family barbecue went down, searching for pipe parts. Instead, in the glow of the lighter, as we said, they found a decapitated body. Inside was the body of a young African-American girl who estimated between 8 and 11 years old. Well-nourished, her hands bound to her back with red and white nylon rope. She's only wearing a yellow V-neck sweater, no underwear, signs of sexual abuse, and her head was also missing. According to Dr. Mary Case, who was a medical examiner on the case, she apparently was severed by a long knife or hatchet. And also the main investigator, who still to this day are very checking in on the case and everything. Were Detective Joe Bergen, Officer Stan Sadowski, who is now deceased, Herb Riley, and later on Sergeant Brian McGlynn. Detective Bergen noted something chilling. There are only 6 steps leading down to the basement. He was not the one that went down the stairs. I believe he said it was Officer Stan Sadowski and also Herb Riley that went down there. And there was not a single drop of blood on these steps at all. At first, officers thought the victim was an adult, but later on they discovered it was an actual child. Now, for this next segment, we're going through this brutal evidence piece by piece, because when you lay it all out, you start to see how close the investigators actually came and how far they were still from the answers that they needed. Every item definitely tells a story, and yet none of them have ever spoken loudly enough to this little girl. The first one was the yellow V-neck sweater. This was the only piece of clothing that she actually had on. This child size yellow V-neck, no tags, no brand, no laundry marks. But later on, the director did show Sergeant McGlynn a similar sweater that could be bought at that time. It was a Robert Bruce product that was sold at that time at the famous bar JCPenney and other stores as well, and he definitely said that is definitely a similarity. Also, the sweater was around $12 to $14. And it's definitely the kind of sweater a child wears on a school day or chilly evening. That's the only thing she had left. The second piece, as we said before, was the red and white nylon rope. Her hands were bound behind her back with red and white nylon rope. This was the kind that was sold everywhere. Investigators studied the knots, photographed them, and analyzed them. Dr. Chris Case said, quote, "The knots were controlled, consistent, and whoever tied them had done this before. The detail has always stayed with me. It suggests experience, not panic," end quote. She was also wrapped in a white sheet. It was old and faded. Investigators could never confirm whether it came from the building or if the killer brought it. But if the killer brought it from the, if it came from the building, the killer knew the space. If it didn't, the killer definitely planned ahead of time. Either way, the faded sheet was not random on this case. The basement scene. The basement itself was evidence fresh with drag marks on the dusty concrete, clear enough to show the path her body took. She wasn't killed there, she was brought there. Her body was only carried about 36 feet into the building, door to door. And the basement was definitely chosen, and that's the choice that matters in this case. For the condition of the body, she had healed fractures, she was prepubescent, she had no food in her stomach, she had been cared for definitely at some point in her lifetime. As for the pubic hair, there was white pubic hair and semen, but as it was further tested, it did not lead to anything. And yet, also, no one reported her missing. Dr. Case also said within the documentary, quote, that this was one of the most haunting parts. Someone should have been looking for her. Somebody should have reported her missing, end quote. Also, big crucial evidence of this case was the missing head. This could help investigators a lot, but without her head, they lost dental records, skull morphology, and ancestry marks, facial reconstruction, and also trauma analysis, and also the ability to compare her to missing children. This wasn't just brutality, it was definitely a strategy to make sure she was never found or figure out what her identity was at all. And that's just heartbreaking to me. Also, the possible weapon, according to Dr. Joy Cotter, her later observed this case more. The weapon could be a hatchet, a long knife, and she was neatly cut. There was a 2-centimeter hemorrhage and a vertical 1 centimeter hemorrhage. Now, Eric McAllister, who was also a big area resident and person that spoke about this case, he actually grew up in the neighborhood. He was talking about the school system, how there were branches of different schools, some of them blocks away, some of them a mile or two away, and this adds a new layer that the school managed to have this little girl slip through every system meant to protect her. He says, quote, "There were multiple schools around the neighborhood called branches. Some of them were blocks from each other," end quotes. And, it was the early 90s. The schools were very overcrowded, underfunded, and stretched thin. Teachers weren't doing their best, but they didn't have the resources to track every child absence or every child who suddenly stopped showing up. Eric said, the most heartbreaking quote, she didn't fall through the cracks. The cracks were big enough to swallow her whole. Captain William Rilling said that they went through the school absentee records and they found nothing. It was long, and it was a long, tedious process. And there were a few tips and leads that didn't really lead to nowhere. Investigators received many tips, one of them becoming 2 women. They came to the police station claiming a neighbor had a skull. Later, it turned out it was a high school teacher that given it to him, so that wasn't her skull. It wasn't Hope's skull. Later on, a letter arrived in May 1983 naming a local man as the killer, but they could not locate him. Again, another dead end in this case. Also, detectives met a man named Danny who collected skulls. His skull turned out to be male and too old. Also, very interesting, psychics also got involved with this case. One claimed the head was on a fishing boat in Mexico. Didn't lead anywhere. Another psychic, Doreen, was sent evidence by the police station, but it was lost in the mail somehow, even though she proved that she sent it back with receipts. Also, an informant lied to CORE about the head being in Waterfield, Illinois. So every lead pretty much collapsed in the end. Now, there were 2 memorials for Precious Hope. Photographer Ed Sidej attended the original 1983 memorial service. He said only a few people showed up. 4 empty chairs sat in the front row. She was buried at Washington Cemetery. A couple, Mary and Charles Schaefer, donated her grave marker. Yeah, this was the grave. No name, no nothing, but had a quote: "The saddened hearts were healed in knowing the pain of life is over and the beauty of soul revealed." And this is the date of her death, February 28th, 1983. Yeah, this case is definitely heartbreaking to me. It was very hard to watch this documentary at first, but it had a lot of great information. And yeah, crazy. So yeah, it was a very sad first memorial. And then back in 2014, after her body was exhumed, more people actually showed up. And they redressed her in a pink dress, and placed a casket with angels on the 4 corners. And she was renamed Precious Hope. That's how she got her name. Now, the missing head is definitely, as I said before, the single biggest obstacle in this case. And the case didn't stall because investigation and care. They most certainly did and did not give up. And in the 2013, they did an exhumation, um, with forensic technology had advanced. Investigators exhumed her body to collect bone samples for DNA, but first they had to find her. The cemetery, after a while, was in disarray at the Washington Cemetery. Bodies were buried on top of each other. Her grave marker didn't match her actual burial spot. They had to use the old photos that the photographer back in 1983, and they had to use something called camera geometry, matching old photos to trees, signs, and landmarks. They finally located her, but a different body was on top, but 8 inches. They dug deeper and they found her casket and exhumed it. The Smithsonian were one of the institutes that assisted with this forensic anthropology. They concluded that she was not from St. Louis, but most likely from Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Ohio, Indiana, Michigan, Wisconsin, or Minnesota. And then NamUs, which was also a big institute in this case with DNA and everything, they concluded that she's either from Louisiana, Tennessee, Texas, Mississippi. The list goes on. Dr. C.C. Moore was a genealogy researcher. She said it was one of the toughest and oldest cases she ever seen. Due to regulations with ancestry, DNA, and 23andMe, they couldn't use, and law enforcement was not allowed to use those resources. But they used GED match and family tree DNA, but that can only go so far with the DNA. The St. Louis police were also working with Parabon Nanolabs for years, and according to C.C. Moore, they found 2 potential matches, both of them being born 100 years ago, one of the ancestors being either long distant cousins twice removed. The ages between 99 was one of them, and also 100. One refused, and one ancestor is either a niece or great granddaughter. Initially agreed, but nothing, but then stopped responding, basically ghosting them. And that's where the trail ends for now. She was a child, and she had a life, she had a story, and someone out there remembers her. So if you have any information, everyone, contact the St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department. I'll be putting those in the show notes. But for now, until we know her name, we keep telling her story. She was Precious Hope. Keep saying she mattered, and I thank you for tuning in to episode 2 about the St. Louis Jane Doe known as Precious Hope. As always, stay safe, everyone, and see you all for our next episode 3, in the coming weeks.